Hello, Plum here, playing World of Tanks and World of Warships, and soon doing reviews of Star Trek The Next Generation. It is coming at some point, I don't know when. I told you in the last video I would be getting a 4K monitor. I did get it eventually, one day later than I thought, and here it is. It's on my desktop. There it is. It's not a lot bigger in physical size to my old 24-inch sat there. This is 27-inch, but in terms of pixels, holy crap, this has got a lot of pixels on the screen. This is over 8 million pixels. Your traditional 1920 by 1080 that most people play with has got just over 2 million pixels. You can fit 4 10 by 80s on this screen. You put them all side by side, that's what you'd have. So it is incredible resolution to look at. You have to get really close to see pixels, but in terms of gaming, holy cow, this thing is tough to run. In World of Tanks. World of Warships has surprised me. I'll do a separate video for that. But World of Tanks, oh, it's tough. It really is tough to play this on my GTX770, which is a generation old. Brilliant on this screen over here. This is my 1920 by 1200 screen, so I've got a few extra pixels along the top. Adds about another 500,000 pixels to the screen, but brilliant for that. On this one, well, let's just cut into a bit of 4K footage with everything set to maximum like I normally play on that screen, where I would get 100 frames per second. Let's take a look. So welcome to the garage at 4K. You can see all the icons are very, very small. The HUD icons, the tanks, the crew, all other information. But there's a way around this. Wargaming and World of Tanks has added this little bit here, interface scaling on the graphics options. When it detects that you've got a 4K screen, I assume you then get the option to do ×2. Apply that and voila, it looks like your standard garage. World of Warships doesn't do this, and I've had a browse around their settings. I can't find it, but World of Tanks does. So it's a real bonus. So then all my HUD details are as they should be. If you don't enable that option, all this stuff is tiny. I've enlarged the frames per second in the top left hand corner for you. So when the clock was ticking, it was about 20 frames per second, which isn't good enough. Obviously it gets worse as you start driving, as vehicles start moving. We're sort of dipping and rising about 18 to 20 frames per second, and then when the action starts, it gets even worse. This is with everything turned up to the max. Actually, I should be quite surprised actually, it's not that bad. You can play a game of World of Tanks. It's hard work. I wouldn't like to be driving a light tank, but when you zoom in it gets really bad. I think because it has to do depth of field, things that are nearer to you, things that are further away, it just sort of adjusts the focus on those. You'll see in a moment when I take shots at the M44 and a Cromwell, I frankly would have probably hit shots that I'm going to miss because of the stuttering of my screen. Probably some of you are going to say, that's how I always play World of Tanks with about 20 frames per second. This shot here in particular, I just donkey it into the ground in front of it just because I didn't have a smooth frame rate to fire reliably. We are dipping down into the mid-teens. When we look through the reticule, it really does suck. So these are obviously abridged highlights of the game, and 17 frames per second. It's hard work. It really is playing at these frame rates. I don't know how some of you do it. I donked that shot. It was due to the frame rate. I couldn't, you just shoot when you think you've got to shoot, but you're not exactly aiming where you think you're aiming. And we actually hit that last tank. The Hellcat saves us, and that's game over. And even though I was playing that match top tier heavy tank, I was able to actually carve out a pretty reasonable result, which I'll show you, because some of you like my replays, and you're probably thinking, how'd you do in that game actually, Plum? I actually came second. On XP. Not so good on damage done. Ouch, as you could see, that was tough going. The graphics card just simply cannot output enough data quickly enough to get a high enough frame rate to, you want to get at least really 60 these days, don't you, to get a really smooth frame rate. This monitor, by the way, it does have G-Sync, which is a bit of hardware in the monitor, which synchronizes the refresh rate of the monitor to the frames per second being output by your graphics card. It matches it precisely, so you don't get any screen tearing, and that is working an absolute treat. When I play a game that has got a high enough frame rate, ideally you want between 40 to 60 frames per second for it to work completely effectively. It's not going to solve low frame rates on your computer, having a G-Sync enabled on your monitor. If you've got low frame rates, you've got low frame rates. You won't be able to stop the stuttering. But when it's playing in game, yeah, it does help the game far more smoothly iron out any creases, and it just looks really, really nice. I'm impressed with that. Let's turn down the game settings. Let's turn down everything to medium and see how she runs then. So I'm just showing you in the graphics options what I've done, and we're still at 4K. And I've adjusted everything to medium or just better than medium settings if it's given the choice. Turned off enable tracks, and I'll leave the dynamic change of effects quality, as that should help, I would guess. Say yes to all of that, and you actually see the change in the garage instantly. It doesn't look as pretty, obviously. And once again I put the frames per second up, so this is still at 4K resolution, but now we're getting 46 frames per second, and the game actually looks pretty good still. It doesn't look as pretty as it would if everything was maxed out, but you'd be a bit of a miser if you said this looked horrible. It doesn't look horrible, it just looks, yeah, okay, but is it playable? It's debatable really whether it's playable or not. I do okay in this match. I'm able to zoom in, you see the frame rates drop here, 28, 27. That isn't desirable when you're snapshotting a fast moving light tank, is it really? But when you're in third person view, it's quite acceptable. It's just when you zoom in, it just dips down 30 frames per second again. You may think it sounds, you know, silly complaining about 30 frames per second, but maybe when you're used to 100 frames per second, it really does feel like you're not in control of your tank as much as you would like, and that's the whole point, I guess. So I managed to get hull down here behind this rock and start. I actually trolled this CDC over there for quite a while. He fired about 5 or 6 shots and did no damage to me. It's a pretty punchy gun he's got, and eventually I think he does actually punch my ticket and finally gets a clean shot into my hull. Best player on their team. It took the best player on their team to kill me. Yeah. Finally we got their artillery, and how was that game? Obviously you'd hope I'd do even better in that game, but sometimes you just do badly, don't you? What are tanks? Let's take a look. Post-game stats on that one, and I think it's about the same XP that I got on the first game. Has nothing to do with the graphical quality whatsoever, but I know you're probably curious. Yeah, slightly higher XP. I did a lot more damage in that game, 2,000 damage, so that just goes to prove. Obviously that is going to be better, obviously, but I think the ideal situation here is I don't like my games looking a bit kind of muddy and a bit ropey around the edges in terms of kind of textures and just graphical fidelity. I like it all to look as good as it can. I'm going to turn down the resolution of the monitor. I'm going to turn it down to 2560 to 1440, that kind of in-between step between 1080 and going all the way up to 4K, and put everything back up to high and play a game in those settings. And I think you'll find that's a nice sweet spot actually. I think I'll be getting about 50 to 60 frames per second, even though the whole image as a whole isn't as crisp and as sharp as it should be. I think that's going to work. So I've set the resolution down to 2560 to 1440, and you don't need to have any scaling then on the head-up display. It just goes back to 1, as it's not that much bigger than a 1080 or 1200 display that I've already got. And we do see a nice bump to the frames per second, but this is everything maxed out again, so the game's as pretty as it can be at 1440 and 60 frames per second. But obviously it's going to dip down from that when we do zoom in through the gun sight. So we're going to push up here, try and find some action. Go toe to toe with a T29, probably not the best tanking in the world there, Plum, letting him get a shot off at you first. I think I do have a nice little moment here with that Tiger 1. What do you think is going to happen? He's going to pull out. I think, oh, he's seen me. Oh no, he hasn't seen me. Hey, ammo rack. Anyway, the frames per second, they're much better at 1440 maxed out. It's very playable. I played it for a session yesterday and had about 8 or 9 games I think, and it was absolutely fine. I didn't seem to have any problems playing at this resolution with these graphical settings maxed out at 1440. In the end it was another win for the team, holding on to those 60 frames per second in third person point of view just. So that's the compromise. It doesn't look as crisp or as clean as a full 4K resolution, but to be expected. Team scores, how do we do on that one, Plum? Yeah, not so bad. We came third, so an ordinary game of tanks, and about level top on damage, was it? So that is totally acceptable on this screen. It looks good and everything feels great, and it's a big screen, it's really immersive, but it's not as crisp and as clean as it really could be if it was all being played at 4K native resolution. So I've got to get a better graphics card than my 770. I think a 970 will cut it, but really I should be looking at a 980 or waiting until this summer when a new generation, I think Pascal architecture is coming out. So that might be worth waiting for and just living with this compromise. I'll do a separate video for World of Warships, because that was a real surprise. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope that clears up anyone's conceptions or misconceptions about what moving up to a 4K monitor means for your gaming computer. If you've got a GTX 770, that's what you can expect. The other specs on my computer are in the description below. So any questions, please ask, or if you think you know a way I can do it better to have 4K running and still have the same image quality, I'd love to hear it, but I don't think there is one without moving sliders the wrong way. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone. Carter Pow, take care, bye bye. What's my second most watched video? War and Peace Revival Event. It's not even a tanks video.